Ever feel like you're kind of on autopilot when you're like making decisions? You're not
Yeah.
alone.
hmm
We're diving deep today into Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman.
Oh, cool.
It's a fascinating look at how our brains work
Okay.
and why we sometimes make not the best choices, even when we think we're being totally rational.
Right.
Uh,
Yeah, this book really kind of breaks down our thinking into two systems,
okay.
System 1 and System 2.
Yeah. Can you break those down for us?
So System 1, it's fast, it's intuitive and emotional.
Okay.
It's always running in the background, helping us make quick judgments. But it's also prone to biases,
Okay.
those mental shortcuts that can lead us astray.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's System 2, the slow, the deliberate, and the more logical side. It kicks in when we need to focus,
Okay.
solve problems,
Right.
or make important decisions.
So it's like having a gas-guzzling sports car
Yeah.
and a reliable but slower minivan all in one brain.
That's a great analogy.
Okay.
And just like choosing the wrong vehicle for a road trip, relying too heavily on one system over the other
Yep.
can lead to problems.
This makes me think about all the times I've like impulsively bought something
Yeah.
and later regretted it.
Oh, yeah.
Was that my system one taking the wheel?
It very well could have been. Kahneman argues that understanding these two systems is key to recognizing our own biases
Okay.
and making better choices.
Mm.
He uses some pretty captivating examples to illustrate how these systems work
Okay.
and sometimes clash.
I'm all ears. Give us an example.
Well, there's the famous invisible gorilla experiment.
Okay.
Participants were so focused on counting passes in a basketball video
Right.
that they completely missed a person in a gorilla suit
Oh, wow.
walking across the screen.
Wait, what? I remember watching that video.
Yeah,
It's hard to believe. You can miss something so obvious.
it's the power of selective attention. System 1 is filtering information
Okay.
based on our immediate goals. And sometimes that means missing crucial details.
Okay.
Even a gorilla.
Wow. I'm starting to see how easily we can be fooled by our own brains.
Right.
So how can we learn to recognize when our system one is leading us down the wrong path?
Kahneman dives into the concept of heuristics, which are mental shortcuts
Okay.
our brains use to make quick judgments.
I have a feeling we all use these,
Mm-hmm.
maybe without even realizing it.
Yeah,
Could you give us an example?
absolutely. Think about the availability heuristic.
Okay.
The easier it is for us to recall something,
Mm-hmm.
the more likely we think it is to happen.
Okay.
For example, if you've seen a lot of news stories about shark attacks,
Mm.
you might overestimate the likelihood of being attacked yourself,
Right.
even though it's statistically very rare.
So our perception of risk can be skewed
Yeah,
by what's readily available in our memory,
right.
not necessarily by actual facts and figures.
That's exactly it.
Oh.
And this can have a real impact on our decisions, especially when it comes to things like investing
Okay.
or assessing threats.
Okay, that makes sense. Are there other heuristics
Yeah.
we should be aware of?
Another important one is the representativeness heuristic.
Okay.
This is where we judge the probability of something
Okay.
based on how well it fits a stereotype.
This sounds like it could lead to some serious biases,
Yeah,
especially when it comes to judging people.
it certainly can. Remember the Linda problem.
Okay.
Participants are told about a woman named Linda,
Okay.
who's described as bright, outspoken,
Mm-hmm.
and concerned about social justice. Then they're asked if it's more likely that Linda is a bank teller or a bank teller who's active in the feminist movement.
Most people would probably say she's more likely to be a feminist bank teller.
Exactly. Even though it's statistically less probable
Okay.
to be both a bank teller and a feminist,
Okay.
our brains are drawn to the option that fits the stereotype.
So our intuitions can sometimes lead us to illogical conclusions.
Yes.
I bet that happens more often than we realize.
It definitely does. And this is just the tip of the iceberg. When it comes to the fascinating world of cognitive biases, Kahneman explores a whole range of these biases
Okay.
and their impact on our decisions.
This is all pretty mind-blowing. We're learning how our own minds can trick us
Right.
and how we can potentially outsmart those tricks.
Yeah.
But before we dive deeper into those biases,
Yeah.
I want to ask you about another concept that really stood out to me.
Okay.
Anchoring.
Ah, yes, the anchoring effect.
Okay.
This is the tendency for our estimates
Okay.
to be influenced by an initial value,
Okay.
even if that value is totally irrelevant.
It's almost like our brains get fixated on that initial number
Yeah.
and adjust from there. How does that play out in real life?
Well, imagine you're negotiating the price of a used car.
Okay.
The seller starts by throwing out a really high number,
Right.
even if you know it's way above market value. That initial anchor
Yeah.
might still influence your perception of what's a reasonable price.
So we need to be aware of those anchors
Mm.
and not let them cloud our judgment. It seems like being aware of these biases
Right.
is the first step to making better decisions.
You're absolutely right. Awareness is key. And once we're aware of these biases,
Right.
we can start to develop strategies for mitigating their impact.
This is all starting to feel a bit like we're learning a secret code
Yeah,
to unlock our own brains and make better choices in all areas of our lives.
that's a great way to put it.
right.
Kahneman gives us a framework
Okay.
for understanding how our minds work, both the brilliant and the flawed aspects.
I'm already starting to question so many of my own decisions.
Really?
It's fascinating and a little bit unsettling at the same time.
It's true.
Yeah.
That's the beauty of it. Thinking fast and slow
Yeah.
is a journey of self-discovery. And
Oh.
it helps us understand not only how we think, but
Mhm.
why we think the way we do.
I'm hooked. And I know our listeners are too. But before we delve deeper into those other biases and strategies for making better choices,
Okay.
let's take a quick break. Yeah. When we come back, we'll explore some of the most common decision-making traps
Okay.
and how we can avoid them.
Sounds good.
Stay with us. We'll be right back. After a short break.
Great.
Welcome back. We're deep diving into thinking fast and slow. And I'm already starting to see the world a little differently. We've covered how our brains operate using two systems. System 1, the intuitive one, and System 2, the more deliberate one. But what really blew my mind is the concept of heuristics.
Uh-huh.
These mental shortcuts can be super helpful,
Yeah.
but also lead us to some pretty wacky decisions.
It's like anything else. A tool can be useful or harmful
Yeah.
depending on how you use it.
Yeah.
Heuristics are no different.
Yeah.
They're efficient. It can also lead to biases
Okay.
that cloud our judgment.
Okay, so we know about the availability heuristic, where vivid or easily recalled examples distort our sense of probability.
Yeah.
What other heuristics can trip us up?
Let's talk about loss aversion. You might be surprised to learn
Okay.
how powerfully this influences your choices.
I'm all ears. What is loss aversion, and how does it affect us?
Loss aversion is the idea that losses loom larger than gains
Okay.
in our minds. Losing $100 feels much worse
Oh.
than the pleasure of gaining $100,
Hmm.
even though it's the same amount of money.
So we're more motivated to avoid losses than to chase gains. That makes
Yeah.
sense. But I wonder how that plays out in everyday decisions.
Think about it this way. Would you rather have a guaranteed $50 or a 50% chance of winning $100?
Hmm.
Most people choose the guaranteed $50,
Yeah.
even though the expected value is the same
Okay.
in both cases.
I see what you mean. It feels riskier to go for the potential $100
Yeah,
because the potential loss feels worse than the potential gain feels good.
exactly. And this fear of loss
Yeah.
can make us stick with the status quo, even
Mhm.
when change might be beneficial.
This makes me think about how reluctant I am to switch jobs,
Uh,
even if a new opportunity might offer better pay or growth.
hmm.
Is that loss aversion at work?
It could very well be. We tend to overvalue what we already have, simply because we have it.
Okay.
Kahneman calls this the endowment effect. He describes a classic experiment
Okay.
where participants are given a simple coffee mug.
Okay.
Those who own the mug demand a much higher price to sell it
Okay.
than those who don't own it are willing to pay.
So just owning something
Right.
makes us value it more highly. That's fascinating. And maybe a little irrational.
It's definitely counterintuitive.
Yeah.
But understanding loss aversion and the endowment effect can help us make more rational choices, especially when it comes to things like negotiating, investing, and even decluttering our homes.
This all ties into the idea of framing effects, doesn't it?
Yeah.
How information is presented can drastically influence our choices.
Absolutely. Kahneman describes a study where participants were presented with two options for dealing with a disease outbreak.
Okay.
Both options had the same statistical outcome,
Okay.
but one was framed in terms of lives saved, and the other in terms of lives lost. The way the information was presented had a significant impact on people's preferences.
So even though the choices were logically equivalent,
Right.
the emotional impact of the framing swayed people's decisions.
Right.
It seems like marketers and politicians understand this concept very well.
You're right. Framing effects are everywhere.
Wow.
From advertising to political campaigns to even how doctors present treatment options.
Wow. Knowing about this makes me want to pay closer attention. to how information is presented to me, I might be more easily swayed than I realize. What other biases should we be on the lookout for?
Well, there's the overconfidence bias, which is the tendency to overestimate our own abilities and the accuracy of our judgments.
I think we all fall prey to this one sometimes.
Yeah.
It's easy to get carried away with our own brilliance, right?
Yeah, it certainly is.
Yeah.
And it can be especially dangerous in situations where the stakes are high, like making financial investments or medical decisions.
So how can we guard against overconfidence? Should we just assume we're wrong about everything?
That's not quite the solution. Kahneman suggests taking what he calls an outside view.
Right.
Instead of relying solely on our own subjective judgments, we should consider the base rates, the statistical probabilities of similar events occurring.
So it's about looking beyond our own limited experience.
Yeah.
And gathering more objective data.
Exactly. This can help us make more realistic assessments and avoid the pitfalls of overconfidence.
This is all incredibly insightful. We've learned about loss aversion, framing effects, overconfidence.
Yeah.
It's like a crash course in how to avoid making bad decisions. But before we wrap up this deep dive into thinking fast and slow, I have to ask you about one more concept, the two selves.
Ah, yes. The experiencing self. And the remembering self. This is where things get really interesting.
Can you break down those two selves for us?
The experiencing self is the one living in the moment, feeling all the highs and lows of life as they happen. It's focused on the present. Then there's the remembering self, which is the one that reflects on past experiences, forms memories, and shapes our overall sense of happiness and fulfillment.
It's almost like having two different perspectives on our own lives.
Precisely. And what's fascinating is that these two selves don't always agree.
So how does this play out in real life?
Kahneman uses the example of a painful medical procedure. Patients who experienced a sudden burst of pain at the end of the procedure, even though it meant more overall pain, rated the experience as less unpleasant in retrospect than those whose pain gradually decreased.
So even though the total amount of pain was greater, the ending had a strong impact on their memory of the experience.
Exactly. The remembering self tends to prioritize the peak moments and the ending of an experience, even if it leads to an inaccurate assessment of the overall experience.
That's pretty mind-blowing. So we might remember a vacation more fondly if it ends on a high note, even if the rest of the trip was stressful or boring.
That's the idea. The remembering self has a significant influence on our overall well-being.
This is making me rethink a lot of things. I might need to start planning my vacations a little differently. This has been an incredible exploration into the inner workings of our minds. I'm sure our listeners are as captivated as I am by all of these fascinating concepts. But we're running short on time. We'll be back for one last segment. Where we'll wrap up our deep dive into thinking fast and slow and discuss some key takeaways that you can apply to your own life.
Great.
Welcome back to our deep dive into thinking fast and slow. We've uncovered so much about how our minds work, from those sneaky heuristics to the two selves battling it out in our heads.
Yeah, it's a real eye-opener, isn't it? Kahneman gives us this whole new lens through which to view our own decisions and the world around us.
I'm starting to see those cognitive biases everywhere.
Yeah.
It's like a whole new layer of understanding has been unlocked.
And with that understanding comes the power to make better choices. We're not just victims of our own biases. We can learn to recognize them and mitigate their influence.
So how do we actually put all of this knowledge into practice? What are some concrete steps we can take to become better decision makers?
Well, the first step, as we've discussed, is awareness. The more you understand these biases, the more likely you are to catch them in action.
It's like having this mental alarm bell that goes off when you're about to make a decision. Based on like faulty logic or emotional reasoning.
Exactly. And once that alarm bell goes off, you can engage your system too. That slower, more deliberate thinking process. Take a step back. Analyze the situation and consider alternative perspectives.
So it's about slowing down and not letting our system one run the show all the time. But are there any specific techniques we can use to make sure we're engaging that system two effectively?
Kahneman talks about the importance of using checklists and algorithms when appropriate. These tools can help us bypass our intuitive judgments and rely on a more systematic approach.
This makes me think about pilots using checklists before takeoff. They're not relying solely on memory or intuition, which can be prone to errors.
Exactly. Checklists can be incredibly valuable in high-stakes situations where accuracy is crucial, and you can even create your own checklists for everyday decisions, like buying a car or choosing a health insurance plan.
That's a great tip. It's like having a safety net to catch those potential biases before they lead us astray.
Another strategy is to seek out diverse perspectives.
Okay.
We tend to surround ourselves with people who think like us, which can reinforce our existing biases.
So we need to step outside our comfort zones and actively seek out opinions that challenge our own.
Exactly. Talking to people with different backgrounds and viewpoints can help us see the bigger picture and make more informed decisions.
And don't forget about the power of taking an outside view.
Yes.
Like we talked about earlier. Looking at the statistical probabilities of similar situations can help us make more objective judgments.
You're absolutely right. It's easy to get caught up in the specifics of our own situation and lose sight of the bigger picture. Taking that outside view can help us ground our decisions in reality.
It's like having a reality check when our intuition is leading us down a potentially biased path.
That's a great way to put it. And remember, becoming a better decision maker is an ongoing process. It's about being mindful, questioning our assumptions, and constantly seeking to improve.
Thinking Fast and Slow has really given us a lot to chew on. It's challenged the way we think about thinking.
It's a book that stays with you long after you finish reading it. And I think the most valuable takeaway is this. We all have these cognitive biases, but by understanding them, we can become more aware of our own mental processes and ultimately make choices that are more aligned with our goals and values.
That's a powerful message. It's not about beating ourselves up for our flawed thinking, but rather about using this knowledge to empower ourselves.
Exactly. And who knows, maybe with a little more awareness and a lot more deliberate thinking, we can even learn to outsmart those sneaky biases and make choices that lead to a happier, healthier, and more fulfilling life.
Well said. I think we've given our listeners a lot to think about today. I know I'm walking away with a whole new perspective on how my mind works. So to our listeners, thank you for joining us on this journey of self-discovery. Remember, understanding how our minds work is the first step to unlocking our full potential as thinkers and decision makers. Until next time, keep those mental gears turning.
It's been a pleasure.